ladies and gentlemen, to present our next panel, Impact for Games. Would you please welcome back Mr. Asi Burak.
Hi, everyone. How is it going so far? Thank you. Hope you're enjoying it. And I see that these are the survivors that are not eating today. I'm really happy to introduce the next panel. It's actually a project that we're initiating at Games for Change with support from the community and great advisors. And the panel will be the first discussion around it and really inviting the community to contribute. We get inquiries, as you can imagine, on a weekly basis between 5 and 10 organizations that want to get into the space. And many times, they're asking the question, how do we even begin? And we start to feel that there is a need to some meta-research, meta-report that will help to people to define their goals and to even define impact. And the real initiation came from Ben Stokes, one of the co-founders of Games for Change. He came to me less than a year ago at Games for Change, and he said, what about doing an impact typology? What about charting the space? And we thought it's a great idea. I thought it's a great idea because I feel that in learning, there is robust research and robust questioning. But in our field, it's almost everything is falling into one bucket of change or impact. And many people are asking, what is the change? What are you trying to really achieve? And there's a huge difference between awareness and behavior change and doing a game to amplify an existing effort. So we have a great panel for you. The moderator is Gerad O'Shea from the Michael Cohen Group, and they're going to lead the writing on the report, and they're great partners of ours. Gerad, please welcome Gerad to the stage.
Check. Does this work? Oh, this works. Great. I have my own. So I guess everyone can just come out with me. I am technically the moderator, but this is going to be mostly just a discussion, so my role will kind of disappear momentarily. So I want to just quickly introduce everybody and then kind of reiterate what Asi said and frame this project. So all the way to my left, she's spoken like 1,000 times already and everyone knows her, but this is Tracy Fullerton, who's the chair of the Interactive Media and Games Department at USC. Benjamin Stokes, who, as Asi mentioned, is the co-founder of Games for Change, but today he will be wearing the hat of a foundation person based on his time at the MacArthur Foundation. And we also have Shelley Pasnik, who's the director of the Children's Technology Center. So the basic purpose of this project and the reason for it is that Games for Change is a kind of a broad field, and the people who are involved come from very diverse backgrounds. They answer to diverse stakeholders. We all have different understandings of the definition of really messy words like assessment and metrics and accountability and all these kinds of things. So we thought it would be necessary to kind of organize the different outcomes and different ways to measure different impacts so that we can kind of all have a more common framework and language so we can talk across fields and across, game designers can speak to people who are funders and possibly even be involved in influencing RFPs so we can get funded to do the work that we want to do. So I guess we're just going to get started. This is not only the launching of the project, it's going to turn into a demonstration of the process we want. We just spent about an hour preparing for the presentation, which was just debating spiritedly about what this even means and what the categories should be. So if we start getting too out of control, someone can jump up and separate us. I'm not really sure how it's going to go. So we're going to talk about different kinds of impact. So Ben, you want to take it away and get things started?
Let's see. So what is impact for public good? Sometimes it's easy to come to a conference like this and it's talked about in a kind of single term as if games had impact or didn't have impact. And how many of us have been frustrated by that process, that debate as that frame for the debate? Of course, thank you, yes. But this bubble doesn't have a boundary that's nearly this clear. And yet it's an important starting point. Where can we go from here? Do we have an opportunity to build a language that's a little bit more deliberate? Instead of what we really feel is some of what's going on is there's a little talking past each other. Claiming a game has this kind of impact, evaluating it, oh, it doesn't have any impact, where what we really mean is it doesn't have any educational impact, but maybe it has huge impact for community organizing. Understanding those different things and helping to make the conversation coherent, I think, is some of what this is about. I mean, you start thinking about just a couple games, which people have probably heard about at this year's conference or at prior years. Half the Sky, a game that has come up a number of times, has had a million people look at it, play it, be engaged. Do I Have a Right, a game around some classic civic issues and civic education. Zombies Run, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Makin' Money, a really interesting game that's an alternative currency game, played on the streets of Macon, Georgia, often involving real money that people could exchange in businesses as kind of a buy local campaign. And Fold It, a game where you're solving puzzles for science. And we picked these 5 just to very quickly show there's an incredible diversity of the kind of games that are in this space. And that they're doing, in some ways, functionally, very different things. So maybe just as a way to begin, we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into one of these and talk a little about Fold It. See if I can get up the video here.
So Tracy, do you want to walk us through this game and talk about the different impact that it has and maybe that it doesn't have but is being assessed against?
Right, so
The most basic
Fold It
interaction
is
in
a
the
really
game.
great example because it's gotten a lot of press, right? So I'm sure many people in this audience have either played it or heard about the successes of Fold It, right? So basically in this game, for those of you who haven't heard about it, the players actually learn how to fold proteins, right? And discover new proteins through this 3D model puzzle game, right? And you can see that it actually is a fairly complex looking situation, and as you move it, you see up on the top your score is going up and down. And one of the interesting things about this game is that there's a fairly complex algorithm underneath this that is judging your protein based on true scientific measures about the sort of the relationship between all the parts in the protein, right? One of my critiques of this would be that it's actually not showing the player much about that underlying algorithm, so that basically what the player is engaging in is a fairly simple 3-dimensional puzzle, and almost by intuition, they are learning to fold proteins. Now, there's a fairly dedicated group of players who play this, and actually that's one of the great success stories of this game, is that these dedicated players have in fact discovered new proteins through the play of this game. And I think that is a particular impact that's of interest. I would argue, and my critique of it is that it is not a particularly good game that teaches, for example, neophytes about what proteins are and how proteins may be folded and what it is that you're doing when you're moving and juggling these 3D models. But in fact, for those who do understand the process, that it is a really, really interesting tool.
So with the risk of kind of skipping ahead a little bit, does it matter? Is it okay that it is successful in certain measures or in certain areas? And does it need to create learning amongst naive users?
Well, I think that's one of the questions that we want to ask, right? Which is, do you need to make claims in all the sort of various areas that it might have impact? And I think that for our purposes here, the answer is no. And that one of the things we might want to do is start clarifying for ourselves the various types of impact, the buckets of impact, if you will.
So in some ways, our provocation today is with all of you and with the Games for Change community to ask, if we were to pick 4 or 6 buckets, categories, not for the games themselves, but categories of impact, almost categories of assessing impact, ways of assessing impact, how would you do that? Could we empower ourselves as a community to be more coherent in what games really do? Can we talk more coherently about the kind of impact of a game like Fold It if we had some clearer categories rather than lumping everything in and saying, it's a game, here's how games work. So as maybe just taking Fold It, we've initially started to put out a couple of these categories as ways to think about this. And we want to hear from you. Are we missing categories? Are there more? Let's show you, though, a couple of the ones that we've got in terms of this game.
Great. So, and again, just to reiterate, this is the beginning. We feel like we have a pretty good start, but at the end, we're going to give an email address that you can all, send us your thoughts. And not only that, but we'll be interviewing people throughout the next 6 to 9 months about how close we are, how we can make it more close, and we'll get to that later. So, in the beginning, we have these 3 potential places to start, and learning, I think, gets most of the focus. If a game is good at achieving educational goals, specifically learning. So then we also, but Fold It also is very successful, and I think Benjamin would agree that in terms of civic labor, they were able to solve problems by encouraging very knowledgeable people to participate in a problem as a group. So that kind of fits into 2 of these categories. Needed resources were made available through a game, and then also they were able to engage and work together on this project. And Ben, you said something interesting earlier about whether those people would continue to work together if the game wasn't there, or if they have now created a unit that is more that would stay together longer. Do you want to speak to that now, or are we?
Sure. Well, I'll just mention it briefly, and then which is one of the notions that we often talk about with collective organizing in civic work is the idea that a group is empowered. And in terms of individual learning, there's a certain amount of empowerment when I have more skills as a person, but collective empowerment is when we can come together as a group and get something done. And this is used a lot in community organizing work, frameworks for collective empowerment, things like collective belonging, the shift from efficacy as an individual measure to group efficacy. And so what you might ask is, after the game of Fold It, without the game, now the game taken away, can those players self-organize to tackle another science problem? I'm not sure that they can, but it's an interesting question that other games might be able to tackle. So maybe I'd be curious to go back to Tracy. Tracy, you were in describing the game, where would you put Fold It on some of these categories?
Well, I actually think it falls more on the civic labor side. I mean, I think that's the most successful aspect of the gameplay, to be honest with you. I mean, I would argue that the learning aspect is okay, but it actually it would require supplemental sort of outside intervention to actually make it a learning game about proteins and their structures, and how it is that folding is an important aspect of dealing with proteins. So I would say that civic labor, it's an important part of its outcome. But what's interesting is that the game has been publicized as being a learning game rather than one in which civic labor was the desired and really impactful outcome. And I think this is one of the important reasons why we should have this discussion, because if we can come up with more apt outcomes and we can discuss them more publicly, then we don't have to fit all of our games into the same very narrow niche of outcome objectives.
And we can also develop ways, and even the ways are already there, of measuring these different kinds of outcomes, but if we could, if we could communicate about those and recognize the importance of those things, then we could raise awareness of these are equally valid outcomes that games are capable of impacting.
Right.
And that they don't have to be learning games to be impactful social games.
So what are we missing? Obviously, there's only a couple here. You may guess from the geometry that we've set up that there are some holes. We're hinting that there are some more categories to come. Well, one, if you think, maybe I'll give the audience a chance to just think for a second, what else would you put up here? Because in some ways, we do want this to be a conversation. Do you have a game, does your game fit into one of these areas? Is there an area that's missed here for a kind of impact that your game might have? We're going to actually, we're going to have opportunities for impact or suggestions at the end. We're going to keep running through this for a little bit further. One clear one is behavior change. How many people were thinking that? Maybe there were a couple. There are some people. Okay, excellent. A number of hands went up, and we have a game that we wanted to talk about this a little bit as well. The game Zombies Run.
So has anybody played Zombies Run? Okay, great. So this is not technically a game for change or impact, although it has been played by hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and it has engaged them in getting out and running and exercising. As we all know, obesity is a huge public problem, right? It's an epidemic, right? And so what you have here is a game that essentially gets people out exercising in it, and I think it's successful in terms of its individual impact, so in the sense that it motivates individuals to get out and change their behavior, change their lives. It also, it's intrinsically interesting because the narrative keeps you coming back day after day. So rather than even just say the gamification of your exercise, which a lot of tools try to do, where they just give you rewards and things like this, there's an actual story that you're following. So if you're worried about some character who's in trouble, you're going to go out and run so that you can actually hear the end of the story, right? There's also this interesting thing that happens where it becomes a social tool, because now I am doing Zombies Run and my friend is doing Zombies Run, so there's this water cooler aspect where we actually have a community, a water cooler community around Zombies Run, around our sort of behavior change, our exercise. I think this is a tremendously interesting game also from the design point of view. The designers did not go out and get a grant for behavior change. What they did was they made a game that was true to their hearts as designers. They thought, this is an amazing experience that I want to give to other people. And I think that when games come from the heart, from a designer's true creative impulse, they often have a spark to them that is sometimes missing in the kind of more, I must design a game in which these 4 outcomes happen, and there's a sort of deadness to the design process.
Can I just jump on that and say one thing is that a lot of us are really angry at assessment. If you may have picked this up in the conference earlier, especially designers, creative folks who work with games. There's a lot of frustration that what happens with games and assessment is that assessment pushes us away from the creative side, away from the thing we want to do. And I think that some of the argument that we're trying to present by having a couple categories is the problem might be if a game like Zombies Run were to come up and these were the only categories that are up there, and you start optimizing Zombies Run to be a game that's really about learning, and we're starting to measure cognition. Okay, that would be a disaster.
Or the history of zombies or something like that.
Exactly. Now, you could look at civic labor, but is our goal getting hours run? Is that like a great society has enough sneakers worn through?
How many hours have you run from zombies?
And group empowerment, it's not really a game about collective empowerment. I mean, it might be in a general movement sense. These are always blurry categories. Every game probably is in several categories, but a game like Zombies Run might fit better if we were to go forward and had a couple more categories. So off to the right, behavior change. If we're thinking about this in terms of even just individual behavior change, shifting actions, shifting practices. So that's something that Zombies Run does, and we don't have to call it a learning game in order to start doing assessment. I mean, one question just to push it back is, can a designer benefit from a theory of assessment, a theory of change, and do designers even measure their own games?
Or even to go a little bit further, does knowing what your outcome is and how to assess it get in the way of the artistic process?
So as the sort of representative designer here, I would say if you were looking at the tweets, I think there's been a discussion, a kind of schism developing in this conference, a discussion around sort of kind of design for design's sake and design for assessment, right? And there's this development of this almost like fist fight going on on Twitter. And I would say that, designers, we do play testing, right? So we set design goals, and then we test for those goals, right? And so it's clear to me that it's not really as huge a schism as we're talking about. But when you get to the point where the goals, your outcome goals reach beyond the engagement of the game, the ability of the game to transport your players in the way that you desire them to be transported in this emotional and sort of challenge-based system, then you start to then what happens is you get involved in policy, and you get involved in a much more embroiled argument around what we should all be learning, how we should all be learning it, how it is that you measure what someone has learned, and you wander into the territory that education has lived since around the 1960s, right? And this notion that we need to justify what it is that we've done with our time, justify what it is we've done with our money, begins to trap game designers in a way that I think we as designers find unfruitful, right? It is not fruitful part of our design process. However, I will say that I believe that measuring your design is especially in the formative sense, and even in a summative sense at the end, it can be a very fruitful collaboration when framed in the right way.
So how do you think, yeah, I feel like come back over to the circle then. How do you think then, and this is a question for everybody, how does establishing a framework like this aid in the collaboration, in that collaborative process between game designers and other folks, whether it be assessment research folks or foundations or things like that?
I mean, I'll throw one quick thing out there, which is I found as a person who does assessment that when I talk to game designers and show them that assessment can be a tool of empowerment, that they can talk about their game in a language that makes the funder say, oh, that's what you want and that's what you want to measure. When the designer tries to speak in assessment speak, they actually can take back control of the process. And I think when the designer instead hides from the assessment criteria and says that's somebody else's criteria and doesn't feel a sense of ownership over the criteria, that's when it can be really oppressive. So there's a sense in which assessment can be oppressive and assessment can be empowering. And to me, what's exciting here is trying to think about building a common language, I think increases the odds that it can be empowering. Because if you can speak the language that the funders are talking in, if you can speak the language of impact in terms of a particular set of nonprofit missions, I think there is a greater chance that the designer and the assessment people can work together earlier in the process. I mean, I don't know if others agree, but I feel like part of this is about not waiting until the game is finished and then saying, oh, now what did we want to measure? What kind of impact do we have here? I think that's a classic problem in a terrible assessment, is make the game and measure it later. You've missed all the formative opportunities that Tracy is talking about.
And yet, the example we talked about earlier with Zombies Run, there are occasions where, the other side of that is a great game was made, and then folks like us recognize that there is actually a social impact that could be measured. But expanding the definition beyond just, what facts or what, curriculum objectives were attained by participation in Zombies Run, if we look at and categorize and create language around things like behavior change and some of these other categories, then we can potentially measure that impact in another way. So, I don't want to say that we shouldn't be aware of those goals early, but it can happen the other way as well. So, you mentioned also a little bit about foundations. Can we talk more about that? Because Tracy mentioned earlier, there's this education is stuck in this place of justification, and yet there are still plenty of people, not at this conference, of course, but outside of this conference, that are not yet convinced that games are what the impact of games can be. So, how can a framework like this increase funds to expands what people widely consider to be possible with games?
Well, I'll add just one thing. One kind of critique of our field is how many people have applied for a grant from the federal government and they ask you to set aside a certain percentage for assessment. There's at least a number of us who have gone through this process. And I think that if we're actually to step back and think about how is progress made, how is scientific advancement, how does that happen? It's actually a terrible model to think that we're going to measure every game for a percentage of its budget, that the assessment is always a percentage factor of the overall. Because I actually think, and I believe this very strongly, there are some games where the assessment costs more than the game. And there are other games that don't need assessment because we already know that they work. We just need you to make the game. Which means some games should have zero assessment budget, and some games, I even think it's worth having 10 times the assessment budget as the game budget. If that's our starting point for how funding and games are linked, then we can start having, I think, much more interesting conversations about when is it worth investing in assessment for a game. Because some games, we don't need to. We know that they work. And other games, we desperately need. Now, of course, that's in addition to what the designers need. Designers probably need to be doing some assessment to make sure their game is doing the things that they think it should be doing in a very formative way. But an expensive summative judgment, we should be very careful about when do we invest in that. And I think that we should be all pushing the funding organizations that are out there to not just ask for assessment, check, did it work? but actually to say, well, maybe we need to fund an additional grant that's just for the assessment of this project so we can all benefit from it. However, I don't think we can do that until we have some coherent categories.
Well, just, first of all, if you wanted to measure impact in these very different types of situations, first of all, you have to plan an entirely different kind of assessment. So, one of the ways that a tool like this could help the design process and could help the planning process is, let's just say you want to measure the impact of civic labor. Well, you know that you actually have to have a very large study group, right? Whereas if you're going to look at behavior change or learning, you might actually be able to do a small-scale study, right? So, for example, if you are going to plan to do something like fold it, right? Well, okay, this actually says to the designer, this game has to be an online game, first and foremost, right? And it's going to have these properties, right? So I don't know how many times I've been involved in brainstorming for grant projects where people come in and they've seen a game that they like. And they say, we want to make a game like this, but with our content in it, right? And because people laugh because they've been in those meetings, right? So basically, you want to remake a game, but you want to spin it with your content, right? And as a designer, your brain just shuts off, right? Your eyes just go like this, right? Now, if you say to me, I've got a group of people, and they have a secret desire or a talent or something that I want to unleash with a game, what would you do to give these people permission to use their secret talent, right? And it turns out it's protein folding, right? Who knew it was going to be protein folding, right? But this is the thing that they can do, and they're all over the world, okay? How would you design a game for those people? Okay, I might come up with Fold It, right? But if you come in and you say to me, well, I've seen World of Warcraft, right? And I want to make a game for science to teach about proteins. I swear to God, you're going to go down all the wrong paths. It's going to be a horrible experience. Everyone at the end is going to be like, oh, that was the worst game design process I've ever been involved in. So for me as a designer, one of the things this could help, just to shorten my reply, just to say, if you could identify the kinds of change that you want to unleash in the players and who those players are, then you are halfway to sort of your design goals.
Who would you say gets to do the identifying now?
Well, and this is
I think that's part of
the RFP process
and part of the tension that's here.
Yeah.
The controversy around whether it's assessment or evaluation or judgments, the deadening that you talked about, Ben. I think we want to allow for imagination or allow for game players to have that discovery. But if you are a game designer and you have a certain expectation of what the outcomes will be, you might be cutting off other possibility. So how?
This is an interesting question. We talked about this, at lunch a little bit. Like, for example, I was saying, look at Minecraft, and everyone is recognizing the wonderful educational properties of Minecraft, and yet the truth is that you can't put it in any one of these buckets, right? Because they're emergent properties, right? Because Minecraft is the equivalent of a ball, and essentially you can do many, many things with it and play many, many games with it and teach many, many subjects with it, right? So Minecraft would never get funded, by the way, with an RFP, ever, because you can't assess what Minecraft is. And if you tried to, you'd design such a narrow slot of Minecraft that you would destroy all of its other emergent properties, right? So the fact that Minecraft could have never been funded should give us a clue about how bad we are at funding games for impact.
Which is why we're doing this great project, to solve that problem.
Yeah, I think another way that we're almost as bad on that front is how many of you have done academic literature reviews trying to understand what is the impact from games and have come upon a paper which claims to describe, what is the field, and to tell you what are the top 2 theories that you need to explain what games are and how they work. I think that I've seen personally a bunch of these, and none of them is very satisfying. With all respect to those who have authored them, it's an incredibly hard thing to do. But part of the function of different fields and journals is if you publish in an education journal, you're going to use education theories to justify how games work. If you publish in a journal that's about international communication and advocacy, and you're trying to change the political agenda, so you're trying to change where an issue falls on the minds of a political constituency, you're not going to use education theory. You're going to use agenda setting theory. So there's a real challenge in that we have very different fields out there that are all studying games, and the effort to bring them together, I've seen more often than not, leaves out most theories. Not that they miss some things, but most summaries of what is the field miss most of the field. That's a real interesting challenge. How do we start off assessing things? Is it even possible to provide a manual that tells you, here's how to measure impact in your game? I think that one of the approaches that we took here that's a little unusual is rather than take the usual academic approach that says there's some additional academic fields, here's how the sociologists would answer it, here's how the ethnographers would answer it. Instead, what we started looking for was communities of practice. Where are there deep pockets where there are people that go into assessment and think about assessment as a group? Because in truth, we don't ever assess things on our own. We assess as a community about what are the ways that we make evidence claims, how do we talk about that? And Shelley, maybe you could just talk a little bit about some of the communities, since you've done a lot of deep assessment that you draw on for some of your work.
Sure, I'm a bit reluctant because I think yesterday words that I spoke at this conference several years ago, I think were used in opposition when I had said that measurement is the new sexy. So I guess Paulo now is the new sexy. But certainly there is a long-standing tradition in education to take up this question of assessment. And there is a lot of controversy, I think, here too, because it is political. I think, you conjured the 60s, the great disparity that exists in this country and how we think about poverty and how we think about what young people get served and which young people do not get served. And so if any of you need to shake things up, I encourage you to go to the Educational Research Conference. It's a rollicking good time. Thousands of, tens of thousands of people gather each year really to look at issues of assessment. And they think
Tens of thousands. I think we should pause because I think academics take this for granted. People that work in nonprofits have no idea that there are tens of thousands of people in one field thinking about how we measure educational outcomes, right? There's the volume of just like thought and conversation and conference papers is vast that is out there and this is just in education. There are similar conferences in other domains.
And I think part of what this project is about is helping people understand that they don't have to be aware and they don't have to be experts in that vast amount of generated papers and knowledge. The idea is to provide resources and show that there are fields around all of these impacts, and you can go to conferences. You don't have to become an expert. So we're a little over time, so I want to just kind of wrap a little bit about what the project seeks to do and how we're going to do it over the next couple of months. So as we mentioned, this is a conversation. Any questions, any comments, any arguments, any rants you want to make about this, you can feel free to send it to this email. We're going to be contacting people from various fields and that are in attendance in this conference, me and my colleagues at the Michael Cohen Group, to talk to you and get very specific feedback about how the 5 categories we've come up with, how that works, if there needs to be more, if there needs to be less, and also the kinds of additional resources, whether there needs to be a wiki of conferences to attend or fields of study to go into or universities or programs. So please let us know anything that any thoughts you have about the framework, but also what else could come out of this project. And we're really far over, so thanks on behalf of the whole panel. Thank you.
Hi. So the next panel is a good follow-up for this one. I just want to mention earlier when I introduced this panel, we already got some funding for this new report from the David and Lucile Packard Foundation. And we're obviously looking for more partners, and it will be great to have a coalition of partners involved. And if it's not the Bible, maybe it will be the first chapter for our sector.